A while ago, several months in fact, I received a week of free game time on World of Warcraft. And I know what you're thinking. Ooh, free game time on the biggest MMORPG out there! That sounds great! And you'd be wrong. While your thoughts and my own were quite similar in first place, what was my initial opinion quickly transformed. As soon as I logged into the game, I very quickly realized two things. One, that the current state of World of Warcraft feels less like an RPG and more like a race to the raids. And two, that the World of Warcraft is no longer relevant to the story being told. Throughout my 10 days of free game time, I had no expectations of ever reaching anywhere near the level cap, nor did I expect to finish exploring all that much of any of the now over a dozen areas that would be available to me to explore. And after about 5 days, I realized I was right about at least one of those two. You see, after about 5 days, my undead warrior, Skelekill, was level 50 and had absolutely horrendous drip. Not only did I not like any of my equipment, I also had no idea where any of it had actually come from. Sort of just fell into my hands. I then looked at my warrior, and I reminisced back to the days of old, when 5 days of game time would have barely been enough time for me to reach level 20, and it made me incredibly sad. You see, back in my day, when you started an RPG, such as World of Warcraft, you were going on a journey. That journey included not just meeting new people, going to new places, fighting new and interesting monsters, but it also meant getting stronger. Going from the guy who struggles to handle a single goblin to the guy who can take on a gigantic evil dragon in single combat is one of the most satisfying traits of a good RPG. Part of that comes from establishing the pace of an adventure, making sure it takes a certain amount of time to get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, all the way to whatever the level cap is, at which point you should look, feel, and act the part. In WoW, unfortunately, it just feels like you're fighting the exact same monsters, doing the exact same chores, and being treated the exact same way as when you were level 10. Why is that? The king loves you from the moment he meets you. You get the best pick of all the loot. You're swimming in cash. You get all the babes, and oh, that's why. It's not an adventure if the road's been traveled by a million other people before you. It's not a reward if you were going to get it anyway, and it's not a real title if everyone gets it. But that's frankly the smallest of WoW's problems. During my days of exploring Azeroth, I was thrown into the expansion known as Battle for Azeroth, which is currently the experience that all players who have not reached level 50 at least once have to go through. I was sent to the remote islands of Zandalar, an island inhabited by Aztec trolls who worship their own set of gods, known as the Loa. Casting aside my issues with the Zandalari as a race, I was less than halfway through the continent of Zandalar by the time I reached level 50 and was told that I was in fact done with Zandalar and should move on to new content. This was also the point in which the monsters of Zandalar were no longer capable of giving me any amount of experience to continue to grow in power, and the rewards would quickly become less and less impressive, leading me to essentially be forced to move on from the exploration I was undergoing to now jump into the realm of the dead known as the Shadowlands. Unfortunately, however, this was the point of the game that made me lose what little interest I had retained, and I simply stopped playing. It took me a few days to get my thoughts in order regarding why exactly I didn't enjoy my experience at all, and why I didn't want to go back to play anymore after that point, even though I still had 5 days left. But I think I've done a good job of organizing my ideas now, and I will present them in video form for your viewing convenience. Why World of Warcraft sucks. At the root of my argument lies one simple truth that most people who play WoW without the use of level boosting will agree on. The game discourages adventuring. Now, this isn't to say it punishes you for doing the things adventurers should. It doesn't. Instead, it offers greater rewards from not doing those things. As I explained from my experience earlier, I was less than halfway across the continent of Zandalar by the time I was essentially done with that part of my journey, at which point I was told, in no uncertain terms, that I should no longer be there and I should instead go to the spooky continent, which was extremely discouraging since now I could either A. ignore the game's indication, continue to fight against monsters that were now too weak to reward me, or B, follow the game's indication and leave the story unfinished. At that point, I had spent the last few hours being called champion and treated as though I was the Titan's gift to Azeroth by everyone who laid eyes upon me. And now I was being told to leave them to their luck, which left me feeling so empty that I couldn't even be bothered to pick up the game anymore. Beyond that, let's talk about why exactly this was the straw that broke the proverbial gamer's enjoyment. Not so proverbial. Adventuring in WoW has a number of different facets to it. In fact, the game is so absolutely filled to the brim with different types of content that you'd be hard-pressed to be bored if you find any facet of it entertaining. Unfortunately, there lies the exact problem. None of it was entertaining at all since they all worked against each other, or at times against themselves. Let's start with crafting. When I first played WoW, Burning Crusade had only just come out, and I remembered that WoW followed the same method of leveling crafting as most other MMORPGs. Pick profession, acquire level appropriate resources, level up profession, profit. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case, at least in my opinion. I picked the same two professions for my warrior as I always do, mining and smithing. I figured I'd be able to make some nice level appropriate weaponry that would allow me to have a greater level of emotional connection with my equipment. I was expecting to be able to make a copper sword for myself, then a bronze sword, then iron, steel, etc. and etc. But no. Instead, when I learned my professions and then tried to apply them, I quickly realized that I was in fact not able to mine anything because I didn't learn the specific type of mining and smithing for my expansion. After an eye roll that still makes me twitch to this day, I realized that the materials were also no longer the same intuitively understandable resources that I had grown to expect. Monolite, osmanite, and storm silver. Okay, so monolite is for money, right? That's what it sounds like, right? No? Okay. Oh, I see. Monolite is the lowest level material. After that comes platinum, then storm silver, and finally osmanite. Okay, so I just have one question. What happened to copper, bronze, iron, etc.? You know, the easily understandable materials that everyone expects to start with when they're level 10 and just picked up their profession. Why did I have to look at a wiki page just to understand why I wasn't able to hit a piece of rock with a pickaxe? I'm aware that all these areas were originally a way higher level than they are now, but is anyone really going to try to convince me that they couldn't just cut out all this crap and give us something that is easily understandable and then include the other stuff when we're at a supposedly higher level? Is it that hard to just replace these region-specific deposits with level-appropriate materials that are easily understood and then apply the scaling as it would be for someone leveling through the base game? I don't believe it is, and have yet to see an argument that makes me think otherwise. Moving on to the leveling itself. WoW does something that I'm seeing more and more RPGs do, especially ones with an online component, and it's bad literally everywhere with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. It's something that takes away any sense of growth you may have, along with any sense of accomplishment you might have received from becoming a better and more powerful player. Scaling enemies. If I have to play another game where I have to fight the same low-level monsters but with bigger stats throughout the entire game, I may just be forced to go outside and hang out with my friends instead. And I don't want to do that, those guys suck. I've heard 1,000 different reasons as to why it's implemented into games. It's so you can play with your friends. It's so the early areas are still engaging. It's so the player has more freedom to explore, blah, blah, blah. None of us, or at least very few of us, have that many friends. That's why we're playing World of Warcraft. If I go back to an early area and my heavily armored demigod, who just finished handing a soul-eating demon dragon its own spine, goes back to Whimsyshire to collect some daisies for his Alchemy 101 course, I don't want to have to worry about the winged squirrels that there reside being a threat to me. And freedom is meaningless if it has no purpose. Part of being on an adventure is the danger of the unknown. It's not knowing if you're going to be strong enough to handle whatever the next threat is. Part of being a hero in an RPG is knowing that eventually lesser threats become lesser. Throughout my adventures in Zandalar, I was extremely disappointed to see that this area, which may I remind you was originally designed for characters who had already saved the world up to 8 times before, had you going after dock thugs, fighting stray wild animals, and dealing with things that realistically should not be threatening to anyone with the expected experience of an adventurer that is level 110 to 120. And yet all of these threats, from the random dock thugs armed with pocket knives to the blood cultists armed with little more than basic magic spells and low-level demons, were leveled up to match you, the player. I can understand that there is a limited amount of creatures in the world of Azeroth, and that you can't expect the same monsters to be threatening after you've just finished fist-fighting gods and demons. But it's also important to understand how insulting it is to arrive to a new area after defeating your universe's version of Satan, and find out that the average dock thug, armed with a non-magical cutlass, could have done everything that you spent the last 19 years of your life doing, assuming you're one of the 3 people who have been playing this game from launch. Now that we've talked about crafting and leveling, let's talk about the world itself and why it no longer feels the same way that it used to. Warcraft was initially introduced to me via the strategy game Warcraft 3. I want you to take a look at the art of that game. This looks like it wouldn't be out of place in a heavy metal band's wall to serve as inspiration, whereas nowadays, WoW seems to have lost much, if not all, of its bite. None of the world feels as though it has stakes. None of the characters seem to have any real flaws. There's never a moment where the story feels compelling or takes any real risk. As I played through the story of Zandalar, I quickly realized that the Zandalari trolls, despite their outward appearance, had no real place amongst the other races of the Horde. Let's analyze each of the original races and try to see if we can understand why they would all be drawn to each other in the unity of a singular faction. We have the orcs, the large green pig-faced humanoids defined by a blood rage that they can only barely control through a strict and self-imposed code of ethics, remnants of the original invasion of the Burning Legion, an infinite and nigh unstoppable army of demons. Then we have the Tauren, massive half-cow hulks, so physically powerful that any contact they have with those of other races is painted by that difference in mass, leading them to be feared despite their peaceful intentions. There's also the Forsaken, the psychopathic remnants of those few undead that have escaped the grasp of the Lich King, the great leader of all undead, and have joined together for safety. And finally, the Darkspear Trolls, exiles from the Gurubashi Empire, who would rather live separately from their race in exile than be party to the madness of their brethren. Do you see a trend? Each of these races is defined by the fact that they are outsiders, brought together by the very traits that would otherwise make them other in their own race. Let's move on to the races added by the expansions. Blood Elves, formerly the High Elves of Quel'Thalas, whose race was shattered by the destruction of the Sunwell and cursed with an addiction to mana, making them essentially magic vampires that need constant sustenance, or they will wither away and die. Goblins, former slaves of the Zandalari trolls who, thanks to the radiation from the magical rocks they were forced to mine, developed immense intelligence and broke away to form their own society, forced to join the Horde after their own island was destroyed during the Cataclysm. We're going to ignore that the Pandaren exist because they really shouldn't, and also they're a part of both Alliance and the Horde. This theme is even somewhat maintained by the allied races. The Nightborn Elves were isolated for over 10,000 years and are as mana-addicted as the Blood Elves, if not more. The High Mountain Tauren were in self-imposed exile for decades until they finally came out to join the regular Tauren in the Horde. The Magar Orcs are literally orcs that escaped from an interdimensional crusade against their people. And then there's the Zandalari Trolls. The members of this proud, highly advanced society have no interest in joining the Horde, nor any real need if you think about it. Their princess calls upon the Horde's heroes to help solve some internal disputes with a cult of blood magic using trolls. It's quickly established that this blood magic is not only illegal, but extremely frowned upon by all Zandalari, and when eventually a battle breaks out, the rebels are dealt with quickly enough, until the king is wounded and suddenly the whole battle is lost. So you treat the king and go back for another battle, riding atop a massive T-Rex god, which I will admit was pretty cool. But then the T-Rex god gets killed instantly and turned into a skeleton. So you run away again, only to come back later with 4 of your closest acquaintances and wipe out everyone. At this point, the blood magic trolls are scattered and defeated, and the Zandalari join the horde. With the Zandalari come the Volpera, who are small, marketable, plushy-like anthropomorphic foxes, which were definitely not included because someone has a kink. Throughout this entire storyline, I learned little to nothing about the story of the Zandalar, except that they apparently had worshipped a blood god of sorts before the dinosaur gods showed up, kicked the crap out of this blood god, and replaced it. So why, may I ask, is the blood magic of this god's lowest servants strong enough to instantly kill the most powerful of these dinosaur gods? Worst of all, why is it that we have a society that is established as being inspired by a real-life empire defined by blood rituals and slavery, with neither of these issues being present in the actual game and only being mentioned in passing? Is it such a big request to want some level of morality to be discussed in the faction composed almost entirely of creatures with a violent nature that they strive every day to overcome? To finish this video, I want to leave a small note. World of Warcraft, and the world in which it occurs, and the ones that it has inspired, have colored the lives of millions of people. These people play this game because they believe that, despite everything that is wrong with it today, the game can and will get better someday. But the way to make the game better is to make it easier to understand and to play for a new player. Because I guarantee, if someone who hasn't played WoW before, or even who stopped playing WoW a few years ago and is only now picking it back up, started playing now, they would likely quit before they hit Shadowlands 2. I hope I was able to make my points appropriately while only being mildly disrespectful. No, I'm not sorry. If you want to see more of me, make sure to like and subscribe. It really does help a lot. If you have any thoughts on the video, drop them in the comments down below. Follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. I'm on both of those platforms. Hope to see you there. Have a good one, guys. Cheers.